In this walk with Christ and in this journey with Christ, there's always going to be ups and downs with our relationship. You know, some seasons you're going to feel like, spending time with God more. You're going to be on fire to read the word, get in his presence, go to church, and you're just always going to be on fire. But there is some seasons where you may be down, where you don't feel like reading his word, where you're giving more into temptation. You start like slowly feel yourself going back to the world where you don't feel God's presence as much. And so you need to be able to know how to continue to stay connected with God, stay on fire for God, so that you don't end up going back to the world, that you don't end up going back into temptation, so that you can continue to stay on fire for God. Because if you don't know how, then you'll burn out. Because we all go through that honeymoon stage, when we first get saved, when we first, get to know Christ, it's a different experience. And we want to read the word, we want to pray, we want to, get in the church. But 6 months down the line, a year down the line is when it starts to get hard. It's just like any relationship. There's a honeymoon stage, but then it starts to get hard if you don't take the steps to actually keep that relationship on fire. So that's what we must do. We must keep the relationship with God on fire so that we can continue to desire him, continue to, continue to be in his presence so that we can endure this race. So that's why in this video, I'll be talking about the 5 ways that you can stay on fire for God so that you don't end up going back to temptation. The first way to stay on fire for God is obviously living by the Spirit, doing what the Spirit is telling you to do, and also feeding your spirit. What it means to feed your spirit, examples are like fasting, praying, getting closer to God, watching sermons, doing those things that keep your mind on Christ and actually starve your flesh, because your spirit is doing things that that gives you life, and the flesh is things that give you that are fleeting, that are vanity, that make you feel comfortable in the moment but make you suffer consequences later. For example, scrolling on social media for too long, or watching entertainment that may cause you to get tempted, hanging around people that that won't bring you closer to God, that get your mind off of Christ. They are both contrary to each other. So if you feed the Spirit and live by the Spirit, then you won't desire the gratification. You won't gratify the desires of the flesh. And so you need to live by the Spirit. Keep your mind on Christ all day, no matter how busy you are. You can put on headphones, listen to a Christian podcast, listen to a Christian sermon, whatever you like to do, hang around Christian friends, and just keep your mind on Christ. Having a godly community is so important, and keeping your mind on Christ is so important, because if you don't, you'll lose that desire for Christ. It is so important that this revelation that I called a couple of days ago is so important, because it's so true, and it involves our desires. We sometimes ask ourselves, why don't I desire to read the word? Why don't I desire to, spend time with God? Well, it's because whatever you feed the most is what you're going to desire more. So if you've been feeding the flesh a whole bunch, then it's going to be easy to give in to the desires, scroll on social media for a long time, watch the souls, and you're not going to want to, do the things of the Spirit, because they're opposite of each other. But if you're feeding the Spirit, if you've been reading the word for a while, if you've been spending time with God, then that is easy, but it's actually hard to, watch social media for a long time that no longer interests you. That's why it says delight in the Lord, and he'll give you the desires of your heart. Because if you delight in the Lord, if you're happy to be with the Lord, if you're always with the Lord, then he will give you the desires that align with his will. And so you need to feed the Spirit. And it's not going to be easy at first. At first, if you've been feeding your flesh for a while, it's not going to just be easy to read the word. You might get bored. It might be hard to focus at first, but you have to fight through that. You must feed your spirit so much to the point it gets easy. It's just like weightlifting. It may be hard at first, but it will get easy as time goes. So make sure that you're feeding the Spirit. Fight through that one, uncomfortable situation at first, because it is uncomfortable to feed the Spirit once you've been living in the flesh for a while, but it's worth it. And you must stay consistent, because if you aren't consistent, if you start slowing down feeding your spirit, even if you've been feeding your spirit for a while, then the flesh will slowly start to come back. And it's harder to go back into the Spirit once you've been living in the Spirit for a while, and then you go back to the flesh. So make sure that you're staying consistent, because at the end of the day, living for the Spirit is the only thing that matters, because we can't take anything the flesh wants to do with us, because anything the flesh wants to do is vanity. So number 2, the second way to stay consistent with God and stay on fire for God is revolving your life around God. You see, if your purpose is to fulfill God's will and to do God's will and actually live for God, then you will always have your mind on him. So when you're going to your job, you realize you're there simply because you want to spread God's kingdom. You want to use your wealth so you can expand God's kingdom. Or if you know God is calling you to do something and your purpose is revolved around Christ and not your own selfish ambitions, then your mind will always be on Christ. But if you're living for anything else, you're living for money, you're living for relationships, you're living for, this world, then of course, if the devil gives you something fast, your mind is going to get off of God, and you're going to start to get tempted more with the things that the devil is putting in front of you, like social media. And so that's why it's so important to revolve your goals, revolve your life, have the mindset to just fulfill God's will and not your own. That's why it says, let your will be done and not your own, not our will. It says, let God's will be done and not our will. So make sure that you are having the mindset that you are living for Christ and you're not living for yourself. Because if you're living for your own selfish ambitions, then your relationship with God is going to be up and down. You're going to be on fire for one guy. You're going to be motivated to, spend time with God. But then when you're not motivated, you're going to end up going back into the world because you're living for yourself. You're not really living for God. So it also brings me to step number 3, which is build your routines around God, your schedule around God. Because a lot of times we make the excuse of, I don't have time to, spend time with God. I don't have time to get in the word and have that quiet time just to spend time with God. Well, that should not even be an option because your schedule should tailor around God. Your job shouldn't become before God. Your family shouldn't become before God. It should be God before everything else. And so your first thing in the morning or whatever time is best for you should be going towards God, because we all have an hour or two just a free time, just maybe spend on entertainment, just to give ourselves some rest. We all have that time, but we make excuses because we don't want to do certain things, because we feel like that will justify us not spending time with God, when in reality that should be our number one priority, is to spend time with God. So make sure that you're scheduling your time around God and that the rest of the things that you're doing isn't affecting your relationship with God. Because if it does, that's called idolizing the things of this world, idolizing other things before God, and God hates idolization. So make sure that you're putting him first before everything, because if you seek the kingdom first, all its righteousness, then everything else will be added on to you anyway. But if you try to idolize things, then you will be more stressed, you will be more anxious, you won't have any peace. So make sure that you are putting God first before everything that you do. Because God wants to provide for you. He wants to give you the life that you desire. But you just have to be willing to put him first. And the fourth way to make sure that you're on fire for God is to pray. Make sure that you have a strong prayer life. And it actually ties into kind of, step number 3, because if you're putting God first, then you'll make sure that you have a strong prayer life. And the reason why it's so important to pray is because that's how we strengthen ourselves. That's where we get our strength from. And so even David, in Psalms chapter 51, verse 10, he cries out to God and asks him to give him a clean heart and renew a steadfast spirit. So he wanted to get on fire. He asked God to give him strength because we need that strength from God. And so you need to be praying for that each and every day. Pray to ask God to help you stay on fire. And that's how you're going to continue to stay, consistent and discipline in this walk with Christ. And me personally, this helped me, because I've been a follower of Christ for around, it's been like a real dedicated, actually spending time with God, making sure I'm putting him first. I've been doing that for about a year, and it's about a year and like 3 months now. And of course it was easy at first to, to spend time with God. It's like, I call it the honeymoon stage with God, that relationship with God. We all are on fire for God. We all, want to spend time with God the most. But as the years go by, it gets harder and harder and harder. Temptations start to come back. It's get harder to read the word. It feel like, you haven't read anything new in a while. So it just gets harder. But if you continue to pray, prayer has been my weapon to help me fight that. And that's why I pray every single night, because that is what's going to keep me up. That's what's going to keep me on fire for God, so that I'm able to endure through the trials and tribulations he's going to give me. And number 5, the 5th way to stay on fire for God is making sacrifices. This is one of the most important things that you have to do, is make sacrifices. And you may not have to make sacrifices right away when you get in that honeymoon stage, but as you grow closer to God, he will make you make a sacrifices. He will make you make choices. And you may not make that choice right away. You may say, God, I don't want to, let go of this right now. because you think you'll be able to do both. Say it's like social media. I don't want to let go of social media right now. I don't want to let go of video games right now. And so you continue to play video games thinking you can have the relationship with God and, you know, play that video game all day or all night. But if God is convicting you about it, he will not let you have that relationship with him if you are putting that game over him, if you are not being obedient to him, because he may be calling you to a new level. And so you need to make sacrifices. And what will happen if you don't make that sacrifices? You'll go back to temptation. You'll start falling back to temptation. It'll get hard to read the word. It'll get, you know, hard to focus in the word. But until you make that sacrifice, you will not be able to have that relationship with God that you want. So you need to make that sacrifice. Make sure that you are dying to yourself every single day. And that's what it means to pick up our cross. That's what God calls us to do, is pick up our cross. You know, make sure that we are dying to ourselves, and make sure that we're dying to ourselves. That's what he means. He means that we must make the sacrifices to be obedient to him and not live the life that we desire, but live the life that he desires. So make sure you're making sacrifices. If anything is keeping you away from God, make that sacrifice, because you're not going to be able to stay on fire for God if you're not willing to make sacrifices for God. And you know deep down in your heart, God always convicts you. He puts something on your heart and you may not want to do it right away. You may not want to, you know, cut off that certain thing, and you can be like, is this from God? Does God really need me to cut this off? We ask these questions all the time, but you know deep down in your heart that it is God calling you to, you know, cut that certain thing off, cut that certain friend off, cut off certain people in your life, cut off whatever it is keeping you away from God. It could even be a relationship, but you need to be able to make that sacrifice in order to stay with God. So I appreciate y'all for watching. I appreciate all the support, and I hope this video edified you. I hope you can use these 5 steps to stay consistent and on fire for God, because we need this. We all need to endure to the end, and it's a hard fight that we all have to fight, but we just have to make sure that we're using the right weapons. So appreciate y'all for watching again. Appreciate all the support. If you want to support, the link is down below. But until next time, as usual, y'all stay blessed.